say me. He said, look what we did in our community. We have a supermarket in our food desert. We have schools that are outperforming the suburbs. We have affordable housing at a time that other cities are seeing such gentrification forces. And so I just want to tell you that my parents exposed me to Frederick Douglass right in the beginning, that power concedes nothing without a demand. And that one of the greatest ways to make a difference is when you step up, seize positions of authority, and begin to determine the destiny of your community, of your county, of your state, of this nation. And I want to tell you that, and I know this from my friends. In fact, Kamala and I were just on a call together talking about maternal mortality rates. That we are the richest country on the planet Earth, but we lead developed nations in maternal mortality. We're the only developed nation that doesn't have paid sick leave and paid family leave, which is causing the deaths of people right now in this crisis or in the past. There's so much injustice still in this country. That nobody should be comfortable with it. Nobody should let their moral muscles become so flabby that they don't get up and do something about this fight. But I learned early in my life from these tenant leaders that nothing will change unless you do. And so I just want to say I love this organization, because what you all are doing is just igniting this nation to stop that moral complacency and understand that we have not yet made true the promise of this democracy. And it's why Susan B. Anthony stood up and used the very words of our national founders to drive change. It's why Martin Luther King on the steps during the March on Washington talked about a bill past due that the founders made in promises. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we're seeing this clearly in this crisis. We are not a nation yet of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everybody. We are not a nation of equality under the law if you look at our system of mass incarceration. We are not a nation where fundamental rights and human dignity, like access to health care, are made real. And there are too many communities like mine still that struggle with outrage, where children don't have access to clean water, where we have Superfund sites poisoning our air with asthma rates off the charts. We know what the crisis is, not to mention the global challenge of climate change. And so I'm charged up because that woman on the, and I'll end with her words, that woman on the sixth floor of the projects named Miss Virginia Jones, I found out after I moved in those projects that her son was murdered in the 80s in the building in which I moved into. And we had a lot of violence in my neighborhood. I'm still in that neighborhood now. Back then, a lot of violence. And her son was one of those people murdered. And I didn't understand why she stayed in those buildings, because I knew where she worked. She had a county job. She could have moved out of those low-income housing projects. And I remember when I asked her, she was almost seemed offended by the question. I said, Ms. Jones, why do you still stay in this building? And she folded her arms and she looked at me and she said, why am I still in Brick Towers? I go, yes, Ms. Jones. She goes, why am I still in apartment 6A? I said, yes, Ms. Jones, that's what I asked. And she said, well, I'm in charge of Homeland Security. And I love that answer, because she wasn't waiting for somebody to anoint her or appoint her. She was getting up every day to fight. She taught me a spiritual lesson, that hope is a muscle, hope is action, that hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. And so this is an organization that is really about hope, not just sitting back and waiting for change to happen, or praying for change to happen, or wishing that change would happen. This is the catalytic agent. You are the catalytic agent that's going to make hope actually blossom and go viral, to use that word, against all the darkness that so many people in communities like mine, communities of color, communities that are marginalized, actually get the justice that this country has promised them. And so with that, you have a phenomenal panel of some of my friends who are also heroes, which is a great combination. And I just want to thank this organization for giving me a few minutes with you. You all inspire me. The young people I meet who brought along the Green New Deal, who brought along the real fight for gun violence, to end gun violence in this country, who are bringing the fight for universal health care. My hope really is driving not just from the activists I know in my life, but from the new generation of activists that are rising up, who will get off their seats and actually do like Ms. Jones told me to, run for office. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you have a busy schedule, and we are so grateful for you fitting us in this evening. You're welcome to stay and hang around. I know you got a lot of stuff to do tonight. We're going to bring up the rest of our panelists tonight. And as they jump back on screen, I want to remind folks, if you have questions for the people this evening, which include Valerie Jarrett, one of the former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii, Senator Kamala Harris from California, and Secretary Julian Castro coming to us from San Antonio. Please do submit them through the Q&A. I'll go through as many of them as I can, and we'll try and get us through as much as we can as possible. First, I want to go to Valerie. Valerie, as someone who's worked very closely in the White House and really been a part of this work and through previous crises, what has disappointed you most, and what would you hope to see when a Democratic president hopefully takes over in January?
First of all, thank you, Amanda. You and I met a few years ago, and you told me your story about sitting on that couch after the election and then waking up on Inauguration Day and saying, I got to do something. And you did that, and you have built an organization that is an enormous contribution to the process. You've helped so many elected people who want to run for office get in the game and help them make a real mark. And so I just want to start by a huge shout out for you. So in a word, I think that the president has completely flubbed this. Let's begin with the fact that Barack Obama in 2014 said, one of the issues that we need to be most concerned about is a pandemic. Then, during the transition, we prepared a tabletop exercise for the new administration to help prepare them for how to deal with the pandemic. They kind of blew it off and slept through it. Then they shut down the office in the White House, in the National Security Council that we set up after we went through H1N1, Zika, and Ebola, where we learned an enormous amount about how important it is to have a coordinated effort in the White House. Then you move on to the fact that they cut funding for the CDC. And then over the course of the last several months, we've gone from complete denial, where President Trump has said, it's a fantasy, it's a hoax, we don't have to worry about this, just ignore it, to actually happy talk. We're going to be back by Easter. We have a new drug that's going to solve this problem. And then now denial or kind of deflection. Let's focus on the World Health Organization and mistakes it made. And they did make mistakes. But is this a time to cut funding to the World Health Organization? I don't think so. And so I think what I've seen over this course is the difference between an administration that was focused, evidence-based, science-based, organized, honest with the American people. And so I say to you, the stakes, Amanda, are so high. And I think this virus has shown bare, number one, how important government is. And a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that government affects their daily life. But now we see it from the front lines where mayors and governors are competing for equipment. We should be competing and bidding each other up for equipment. The federal government should organize that and buy it for all of us and then distribute to everybody. So I'm very emotional about this. I'm from New York right now. I live in New York, Amanda, as you do, and we know that we are kind of ground central for what's happening. And the frustration I feel on the ground from Mayor de Blasio to Governor Cuomo of what happens when government doesn't do what we have a right to expect it to do. And the only way out of this is if people, good citizens, decide they're going to get involved. They're going to roll up their sleeves, they're going to run for office, they're going to get in the game, and they're going to compete. And so a shout out to you, Amanda, for helping build that next generation of leaders, because government is a vital, vital function within our democracy. And if we don't like it, don't shun it, get involved, support a candidate, or run yourself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Senator Harris, one of the questions we've gotten over and over again this week is what can we do to protect the election this November? I know you just rolled out some stuff today about that. Can you talk a little bit about it, and in particular, what people can do to help you get that done?
Right. Thank you, Amanda, and I join all of the comments. It's so great to be on this panel with these friends who have been in the trenches in the fight for so long, and so greetings to everybody, and I hope this finds you well and safe. Voting. So here's the thing. Our right to vote has been under attack for a very long time, and then most recently, obviously, when President Obama was in office, the Shelby v. Holder case in 2013, where the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. That's just the most recent of what has been a longstanding history of suppression and denial of the right to vote. So we had that happen in 2013. Immediately thereafter, there were at least a couple dozen states that implemented laws that were designed to suppress the vote. In North Carolina, the Court of Appeals reviewed one of those laws and said it was designed with, quote, surgical precision to deny Black folks the ability to vote. So we had that happen in 2013. Those laws started getting passed. Fast forward to 2016, and I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I can tell you what has now been publicly revealed, which is that Russia did interfere in the election of the President of the United States. And they did it through a form of manipulation that was about a misinformation campaign. What many of you may know is that when we dug deeper to figure out what was the target of that misinformation campaign, it turned out that the target in particular of their misinformation campaign was to target Black voters, to build on what already was justified mistrust of a system, and to do it in a way that would basically turn people off. So they'd say, you know, I'm not going to deal with that mess. I'm not going to vote, which has, of course, the functional equivalent of suppressing the vote. And now we are looking at 2020, one of the most important elections of our lifetime, where we have a person in the White House who I join with every comment that Valerie Jarrett has made, has completely abandoned the responsibility of the President of the United States during a crisis. You know, I've been doing interviews recently and I've said, you know, we need to just stop hoping that this guy might pretend to be president. He is just incapable of doing this job. And so this election in November 2020 is so critically important. And that's why I am supporting Joe Biden. I think many of us are, because there's too much at stake and we cannot afford another 4 years of Donald Trump. To that end, I have proposed the Vote Safe Act. Essentially, we already have a lot of push among my colleagues in the Senate, Brian Schatz, aloha, around what we need to do to encourage states to do vote by mail. And so we're creating financial incentives for states to do vote by mail. In addition to that, my proposal through the Vote Safe Act is that for those populations who are still going to go and vote, meaning they will not vote by mail or vote by mail will not be instituted, let's make it easier for them by making access real, and let's make it safe for them. So specifically, I'm proposing not only that we give $5 billion in incentives to states to do vote by mail, but also that they implement early voting. In my state of California, we can vote weeks before. So I'm proposing at least 20 days before the election, people can start voting. And then on the access issue, that we pay particular attention to, for example, voters with disabilities. We pay particular attention to English as a second language voters. We pay particular attention to the indigenous people who are throughout the country, including in Alaska, many of whom don't have a post office or a postal address, and making sure they have access to vote. I'm proposing that states implement a process of curbside voting. We are proposing that we expand access, including the training of poll workers, so they can do the best job possible in allowing people to safely distance while they vote, but encourage people to go to vote if that's what they're going to do if they don't vote by mail, in a way that is safe, so that nobody and no American has to make a choice of their personal safety and health versus exercising their right to vote. And I invite everybody to join me. One of the challenges that we're going to have on the vote by mail piece is we have a lot of folks who, like myself and so many of us, take great pride in voting, knowing how many fought and died for our right to vote. be it those who were African Americans who were excluded, women who were excluded. And so we have ceremonies and traditions around going to vote. We have souls to the polls. We take our children, we take photographs. And so part of what we have to do, and collectively with all of the leaders on this call, let's tell people, those of us who have voted by mail, how easy it is. And what I like to say is we want to remind people, you can honor the ancestors by voting by mail. So let's remind people of the ease of voting by mail, and that they should be able to trust that system. But the most important thing is they vote.
Is there something that folks on this call can do to help get that passed? Is there anything you can recommend for them?
I would recommend that you tell the stories of, Wisconsin is a perfect example, of course, where there were less than, I think about half a dozen polling places that ended up being open versus the over 100 that were open in the previous election. And those were the warriors. We all watched as they stood in line, some for 2 and 3 hours with their masks, determined to vote, knowing that there was politics behind the keeping that election open instead of delaying it. And they were committed. And so the Republican agenda, which included hoping that they would get all of these conservative judges elected, backfired. So let's tell the stories, though, of how we will make it easier to allow people to vote, and the obstacles that are in place if we don't make it easier and pass these kinds of laws. And I think it also really bears saying that we are not telling people who to vote for. We are just saying, make it easier for people to vote. We want to talk about standing for America during this crisis, about our love of country and our patriotism. A true expression of patriotism includes fighting for free and fair elections, which are part of the hallmark of our democracy, flawed and imperfect though it may be. So let's get the word out, but in particular, remind everybody vote by mail if they can, but demand that their elections sites and their polling places be safe, and take a look at the recommendations I'm making as suggestions that you can make for your registrar of voter, for your county clerk, for your secretaries of state, and so on.
Thank you. Senator Schatz and Secretary Castro, both of you have your roots in local politics as a state representative, as a mayor. We have a lot of folks in this call tonight who are either in local elected office or are running for it now. And at the moment, they're some of the most credible communicators with their communities. Do you have any advice for them of ways that they can make sure that they're really engaging people who need a little bit of leadership at the moment? We'll start with you, Senator.
Thank you. And Julian and I also have one more thing in common. We are both identical twins.
That's right. That's right. And we're both the better looking twins, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I knew that. That's fun.
That's right. I got involved in electoral politics when I was 25 years old. I was running a nonprofit organization dedicated to community service for the environment. And some of that work brought me to the legislature. I got very frustrated at a committee hearing, went to my Sunday night dinner with my mom and dad, and expressed my frustration. And my dad said, well, why don't you run for office? And I said, because I'm 25 years old. And then he told me that Hawaii had a long and proud history of electing young women and men to the Hawaii legislature. The Speaker of the House was a busboy at a place called the Flamingo Chuck Wagon when he was first elected at 19 years old. And gave me a long list of people who had run. So I started to think about it, and I got very good advice, and that advice was wear out your shoe leather, wear out your shoes, knock on every door. I did that until people who were voting for me and who were not voting for me ended up slamming the door in my face saying, please stop coming by. But that's what this is about. It's about it's an interesting combination of the humility to put yourself out there and be embarrassed, but also the kind of belief in self and belief in the cause to be willing to put your name on a bumper sticker, which takes at least a reasonably healthy ego. But you need that mix of some ego, but also a willingness to kind of supplicate yourself in front of a voter and say, look, I just want you to give me a chance. I want to serve you. And people of the Makiki district gave me a chance, and I just want everybody to understand that the difference between an elected official and a person who thinks maybe I should be an elected official is just running and winning. We're not actually some category of different human beings. It's just a matter of kind of walking across that threshold and deciding that we are this is a democracy of, by, and for the people, and that means that somebody's got to step up and put their name on the brochure and the website, Instagram, and it's probably going to be you. Even if you don't even want to do it, you got to find that motivation and change the world from your individual community.
And let me just echo, what Senator Schatz said in terms of the commitment to community, and also Amanda, and to Ross, to everybody who Run for Something. I want to echo what Valerie said and just commending y'all for the wonderful organization that y'all have started from scratch in just the last couple of years, and all of the tremendous leadership that it has helped spawn in our country, and the difference that the folks you had up on screen earlier and so many others are already making in their local communities, and the ones I know are running this time in 2020 that are going to make a great difference in the years to come. I started in local government also when I was 26 years old in San Antonio, and I got into it for different reasons, but mainly because I had a chip on my shoulder about my local community. When my brother Joaquin and I went away to college, I didn't see that many other people at that college or places like it. And I wanted to come back home and to make sure that more people who grew up in the place that I did could have that same kind of opportunity. And if I had one piece of advice for folks out there when it comes to getting into politics, and then I'll answer your question directly about what local folks can do right now, it's that you should know why you're running for office. And it should be focused on helping other people. The people that I've seen go astray when they get into office are people that are in it for themselves. They want their name on the door, or they want the tickets to the ball game, or they want to get contracts for their friends, or whatever it is. Today, when we think about the challenges of local government, you have a lot of things going for you in local government. Number one, you're closer to the people than anybody else. If you're in local government, city council member, school board member, and so forth, the county commissioner, the chances are that you know a lot more of the neighbors because you have block walked, you've knocked on those doors. I would be thinking about how you can help organize blood donation drives, food donation drives, be as active as possible on the ground at that level. You also have the new tools available to you that we see, of course, on a daily basis. President Trump and Governor Cuomo doing their daily updates, but people also want to know at the home level, at the community level, what's going on in my neighborhood. Think about how much we've seen a proliferation of things like Nextdoor and similar types of services, because people actually want to know what's happening right around there. You can help fill in that gap of translating what all of this means to them and the services that are available. Because if you look at the services that are going on right now, a lot of them are local government services. The trash is still being picked up. Our firefighters and police officers are still on the street. So many local services are still happening. And then finally, be creative. I really applaud cities like Portland and a few others that I have seen partner up, for instance, with hotels to house the homeless right now. We have a whole bunch of hotels that are empty. People probably saw that image out of Las Vegas of homeless people sleeping in 6x6 painted white boxes to maintain social distancing, but they're sleeping in a parking lot in the shadow of hotels and casinos in Las Vegas on the Strip that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas you have cities like Portland that are being creative and getting people housed now. My challenge to both candidates and to elected officials at the local level is use your closeness to the business community, to your neighbors, to be creative and make things happen in a unique way.
That's such a good answer. I want to stick with you, Secretary Castro, and then if anyone else has things to contribute here, please do. Earlier this week, we talked about the importance of focusing on underrepresented communities, in particular domestic workers, undocumented immigrants, people in prison, making sure that we're defending them in a moment when they can very quickly be ignored. Is there a policy or something that you would encourage people to start advocating for or to direct their attention to that you think is not getting enough attention right now?
Gosh, there's so many of them, you know. I mean, I think everybody has said, and certainly everybody on this panel recognizes, and they've been a great champion for the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable are being the most hurt right now. But let me just give you a couple of them. Number one, we've seen that our farm workers are essential workers. They're going to work every day, many of them undocumented, and putting their own health at risk so that people can have food on the table. And yet for generations, they've been treated differently in their compensation, in their working conditions. I hope, and I'm really glad, you know, we have Senators Schatz, Harris, and Booker that have been champions for doing right by farm workers and other vulnerable workers. You know, I hope that we'll address workers like that in addition to so many other minimum wage and just above minimum wage employees that have become frontline workers. And then secondly, people who are homeless. We've had a housing affordability crisis for some time in this country. And one of the things I'm most proud of the leadership of President Obama and Michelle Obama was that during those Obama years, homelessness was going down in this country. And the First Lady led a tremendous effort to reduce veteran homelessness. We reduced it by 47% between 2010 and 2016. And now it's started to go up again. It's only getting worse. And my hope is that we will learn the lesson of what has happened in this coronavirus period, and we're going to adopt some of the policies that Senator Harris, Senator Booker, Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, and I proposed, like a refundable renter's tax credit, making the Housing Choice Voucher Program an entitlement program so that we can focus on everybody having a safe, decent, affordable place to live and go back in the right direction instead of what we see today.
Senator Harris?
I would add to the list, and it's good to see you, Julian. We spent a lot of time on the road together last year. I would add to the list, and to all of the things that we're talking about, all of the leaders who are on this call your Congress members and advocate for these things. Like, for example, my Vote Safe Act, it will be before them, and encourage them to vote for it, demand that they vote for it. Another issue is during this pandemic, I've actually asked the acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli, that on ICE enforcement actions, that they consider among the sensitive locations for where there should not be enforcement action, that it should be any public health facility and grocery stores. We have also asked that they would agree to stop enforcement around farm workers because, again, talk about essential services, and at the very least, perhaps ICE would agree that during this moment of crisis, that there should not be that kind of use of limited federal resources when we should be focused more on the public safety and well-being of the country as a whole in a pandemic. So there are many populations, including, for example, all of those children. There are 3 million children in our country who do not have access to broadband. So while we are talking about and many joking about the challenges of teaching children at home, there are millions of children in America who are not in any way being taught at home because they don't have access to the main tool that would allow them to be educated while they are at home. So part of what I would request that you demand of your Congress member is that in the next bill that we have a robust amount of money going to states to actually lay out what we need in terms of internet access and dealing with internet equity issues. And that's frankly how I've been talking about it. It's an issue of equity and educational equity, because what this pandemic has highlighted is all of the disparities that existed before. And now those who were doing badly before are doing much worse under a pandemic. But this, again, may be a moment where, to the extent we can see an opportunity in the crisis, where we agree that these are longstanding defects, fissures in our system that can be fixed, not only during the course of this pandemic, but permanently.
Amazing. Anyone else have an answer? Senator Schatz, go ahead and unmute yourself. See you speaking.
All right. Just wanted to sort of wax a little bit philosophical on this particular point, because it seems to me that there's a broad recognition across society, left, right, and center, that this is a time to take care of each other. And that even some of these old fights that we were having about whether, for instance, you should be able to get a COVID-19 test that doesn't have some astronomical reimbursable, right? They just wave it off and say, sure, of course that makes sense, right? And then you say, well, what about insulin? And they say, well, not so fast, right? And then we say, look, we want to make sure that everybody's healthy, because to the extent that everybody's healthy, documented and undocumented, that's going to reduce the total case count and the total death count in the long run. And so there are all these sort of basic principles about how we are all in this together as it relates to this particular pandemic, where I think we're not even arguing for the most part across society. And yet, once we get out of this, we'll be back to arguing over what is fundamental fairness. And so Julian's talking about housing, or how we treat, or who we characterize as an essential worker. I mean, something as someone said a couple of days ago is, if someone is essential, shouldn't they get $15 or so? I mean, how do you pay someone $9.50 an hour and deem them to be essential? It just strikes me that we are in a moment where we can, and I don't mean to sort of overstate the case about unity, but we are in a moment where there's not a lot of arguing about what we need to do in the very, very short run. And that creates a space for a conversation at a later date, granted, about the fundamental structural inequities in our society that Kamala and Julian and Cory and Valerie have been fighting against for all their careers. But now we have a new aperture through which to look at this. And I think there is a sense, at least in my home state, that we're all really, truly in this together in a three-dimensional way, not in a theoretical way.
Go ahead, Valerie.
So 2 points I would make. First of all, in terms of Senator Harris's proposal, we have got to figure out a way where people can vote without putting themselves in harm's way. When I looked at what happened in Wisconsin, and we saw those unbelievable lines with people standing right next to each other, and we have to ask ourselves, well, wait a minute, why can't we vote by mail? Wait a minute, why don't we expand early vote? Wait a minute, why can't we register online and vote that way? And so I think we have to be very creative here and say that if our democracy rests on the fundamental principle that everybody should participate, then why are we having to have citizens choose between their health and their right to vote? And so we are very supportive, Senator Harris, of your efforts in Congress to try to shake up Congress and have it trickle down to the state level, where we need every single Secretary of State to focus on what are we going to do, not just in November, but who knows how long this is going to last. And let's face it, there have been lots of maneuvers underway to suppress the vote, to pass laws or policies or practices that repress the vote. And in a democracy, we should be making sure that every vote counts. The second point I would make, Amanda, is that what has been clear, just in the data that we have so far, is that there is a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Poor communities, Black communities, communities of color. In my hometown of Chicago, the vast majority of people who have died from the COVID-19 are Black. And yet we are way underrepresented in the population. And so it kind of lays bare what we have known to be a systemic challenge. And so as we emerge from this crisis, we have to figure out, well, what are we going to do as a society to make sure that people are treated fairly, regardless of their income and their color? And we know that there are underlying health challenges, for example, in the Black community, whether it's hypertension, high blood pressure, obesity, whatever it is. And the Affordable Care Act had in it research dollars to look at these disparities and figure out how we ameliorate them. And this crisis is laying bare just how important it is to focus on that, because the impact is disproportionately having an adverse impact on those communities of color, particularly the Black community and poor communities. And so what are we going to do about that? So Senator Harris, I completely support what you're trying to do around voting. I think we need to put more dollars into the research that's being done on disparities of health, and I would call on Congress to step up to the plate and stop trying to suppress the vote, make sure that everybody gets to participate.
Thank you. Thank you all for such thoughtful answers. I have a little change of tone here because we have a couple folks in the Q&A who are raising or graduating seniors from high school or in college currently. Their years have now been totally blown to smithereens, and they're looking to get involved in political work one way or another. Anyone got any advice for them? Senator Harris, go for it.
JoeBiden.com. I'm serious. I am serious. We got to get this done. And you know what, one of the best ways, so many of us who ran for office and have been in elected office, also Brian gave a beautiful story, Julian has a great story, Cory, everyone, but we also got involved often in other people's campaigns. And it's a wonderful way to meet people. You know, campaigns have a way of bringing people together that might otherwise take years to meet each other, but around common cause and a common sense of purpose. So I really very strongly encourage you, because we're going to need all boots on ground to get this thing done. We're going to need to make sure people are registered to vote. We're going to need to tell people about all the smart voting options that they have. We're going to need to build up the enthusiasm that is going to come from the ground up as well as from the top down. And I think everyone here, you're on this call because you know your power. And right now we need your power. We need your superpowers. We need everything you've got. We do not want to look back and have any regrets that there's some extra stuff we could have done to make sure that we win this election. Again, there is so much at stake, not to mention I serve on Senate Intelligence Committee. I share that with you, and the integrity of our elections and national security, but also on the Judiciary Committee. I also serve on the Judiciary Committee together with Senator Booker. What we are seeing in terms of the appointments that are being made and signed off on by this president. So that's about winning back the Senate, get involved in a Senate race, or get involved in Joe Biden's campaign. I beg you.
Anyone
I
else?
just want to.
Yeah. Senator and then Secretary, I think you were.
Let me just add one quick thing about sort of my specific advice about getting involved in a campaign. Campaigns, with the exception of, I think, presidential campaigns, are actually not complicated matters. If you're involved in a city council, town council, board of education, state assembly, that level race, it is about doing more voter contact than the other guy or gal. That's it. It's really about reaching more people. And so some of the campaign work, like everybody wants to think of this as some, you know, incredibly strategic enterprise. It's not. It's about, do you have 75 people and the other person has 62 people? And if you've got more bodies making more phone calls with more enthusiasm and more dollars coming in, you're going to win. And so I want young people to dive into that enterprise, understanding that there's joy and dignity in all work in a campaign. And some of that work is going to be standing in the rain with a sign, you know, waving shaka at everybody every morning from 6 to 8 a.m. for 6 months. I did not enrich my brain in those moments. I did not particularly learn anything in those moments except humility and the understanding that campaigns are about outworking the other side. So what happened, in my view, in Wisconsin is that the political climate was good for us. There was outrage on our side, but also we just worked harder. We just wanted it more. And I think one of the reasons we lost in 2016 is we didn't want it as bad as we wanted it when Barack Obama was on the ballot. And we've got to just taste it, all of us, every single one of us, whether we're, you know, at the high command or knocking on doors in Florida or anywhere in between. Everyone's got to just absolutely understand that this is the most important election of our lifetime.
Go ahead, just unmute yourself. Yeah.
In my first election, I campaigned with my ironing board. So I would grab my ironing board, I would drive over to the local grocery store with all my literature and my posters and a roll of duct tape. I would stand in front of the grocery store, I'd open up my ironing board, because you see ironing boards make a great standing desk. I would then use the duct tape to flap my posters over one side. I'd have my literature on top of the ironing board, and I would require people to talk to me as they walked in and out of the grocery store. Like literally, there is something also about campaigning where you have to put pride aside and just know that the most important thing is that you connect with people around your shared values and your shared investment in your community, and in this case, in your country.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, oftentimes, at least in my experience, folks that are, because you said the folks that ask the question are in high school, a lot of times, and they do think that, oh, what am I going to do? Just walk into this campaign office? They're going to say, get out of here, kid. But that's not true. Actually, folks in campaigns tremendously appreciate when young, energetic people walk into the campaign office and they want to be involved. Because too oftentimes the knock on 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds has been that they don't go vote, that they don't want to be involved. And so I think you'll find very receptive, campaign people on the other end. And then also, because this is Run for Something, and I know we must have people watching that are thinking one day of running for something, don't wait. There's never going to be a perfect time in your life to run for office. If you have a passion for it, of course, you need to, know what you're talking about and have a reason for running and be running for the right reason and lay the groundwork for that. But more and more people are running in, their mid-20s and sometimes even younger than that. And so the path between 18 years old and actually running for office, there's not much distance there these days, and always keep that in mind.
Let me say one more thing, particularly since we have two folks on the phone who are running for president. It is not easy. And it's easy for me to say because I was only an advisor to two presidential races. But to put yourself out there, you're in the arena, you're going to be subjecting yourself to all kinds of criticism, fair and unfair. And it is not easy, but that's what public service is all about. And you have to fight for it, and it is a privilege to serve. And I'm delighted to be on the call with people who have run for office and won their seats. But I want to say to all those folks, Amanda, out there who are thinking about running, do a gut check and make sure you have the tenacity of spirit to get in there and fight. But even if you lose, you get your message out and you have a platform, and it is a privilege to have that opportunity. And so I just want to encourage everybody to know that it's hard, but it is worth it, whether you lose or not, and whether you win or not. It's important that your voices be represented in the dialogue. And particularly for folks who do not represent the mainstream, nobody gives up power easily. Nobody does it the first time. I mean, it is so hard to wrangle that power away from those who have enjoyed the status quo. And so the arc of that universe is long. And the only way it bends towards justice is if good people of sound mind and competency and dedication get in there. So I wanted to say, because everybody else on here has run for office, Amanda, except you and I want to say to those who have run, we appreciate you, and we know it's not easy. And we want to just give you a shout out for your willingness to get in that arena and fight for us and to put us first, because we've seen too many examples of politicians who put the other people first, like themselves. And I want you to say that the folks on this call are putting themselves second and putting us first. So thank you all.
That was such amazing advice. And I would be remiss if I didn't say anyone on this call is thinking about running for office. Ross has dropped the link in the chat. We are here to help you. I know I see candidates dropping their information in there, and that's amazing. So thank you for what you're doing for running. This is gonna be our last question. We're gonna go to everyone. It's sort of a two-parter, and because it's come up in the Q&A about a dozen times. What's bringing you joy, and what's giving you hope? This might be the same thing, it might be two different things. Secretary Castro, can we start with you?
Yeah, well, and Valerie just touched on it. I was one of the folks, along with Senator Harris and Senator Booker, who was here earlier, who was running for president, and it was very much worth it. I think she hit the nail on the head that even those of us who were not successful, you feel like you reached a lot of people and hopefully move the ball forward on important issues and have a platform. But that also meant that I've been gone. Probably 75% of the time over the last 13 or 14 months. And so what's bringing me joy right now is just very personal, is getting to spend time with my family. I could not have imagined that I would have this much time with my wife, Erica, and my daughter, Karina, and my son, Christian. But you can imagine that it has been very gratifying to get to spend a lot more time with them than I have in a very long time. That's bringing me joy. What's bringing me hope, and I think that Brian touched on this, is that there does seem to be a little bit more unity right now in our country than there usually is, and for obvious reasons. And that both feels better, right? It feels a little less polarized, a little less partisan, and it feels hopeful, like there's more opportunity to actually do what we should do in this country. And so it gives me hope that from that greater unity can spring a new era of actually tending to the most vulnerable, of actually getting things like universal health care done, and taking it that extra mile, and meeting the challenges of ensuring that everybody can achieve prosperity in our country in the years to come. I hope that it's, to use an overused term, this inflection point. That's what I'm hopeful about.
Senator Schatz?
What gives me joy, two things, being home with my family and the ocean. And what gives me hope, look, hope is a decision that we all have to make. We have to decide to be committed to a better future. And I am, just to be blunt, hopeful about this election. I'm terrified about this election. I'm excited about this election. I'm even angry. But I am hopeful that we can get the democracy that we deserve by the end of this year if we do everything that we need to do.
Hope is a decision. That's so lovely. Valerie?
So what gives me joy is my 9-month-old yesterday grandson, who is here in New York, who I see every day. I've self-quarantined from everyone else other than my daughter, my son-in-law, and my grandson, just frankly so I could see him every day. And I'm hoping that the world that he grows up into is a better world. And I looked at him when he was born, and having had only one daughter, I'll be honest with you, looking at my grandson, who is both black and brown, the challenges that he's going to face are very different than my daughter faced, just being a guy. And I'm hoping that he will grow up into a world that is more accepting, more inclusive, more forgiving, more humane. And I think that what we have to do in order to set the tone from the top on down is to elect people from office who reflect those basic values, those American values that are all about inclusion and acceptance and diversity being a strength. And so he brings me so much joy. And the hope that I get for his future really comes from all of you. It comes from the two of you in the Senate, Julian Castro, who was a member of President Obama's cabinet and a great nominee for president, and also candidate for president, also former mayor. You know how my heart belongs to the local mayors. And so for Amanda, everyone in your sphere who's online joining, as well as those incredible people who've already been successful in their elections, that's what gives me hope, is that we still have people of competence, intellect, dedication, and appreciation that public service is not about them, it's about service, who are willing to get in that arena and in this incredibly toxic environment, fight for all of us. And so I want to encourage everybody out there who's thinking about running for office or who is running for office, look at the role models that you've seen tonight for people who have won races and lost, but are still in the arena fighting to make sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you. Senator Harris?
What gives me joy? I love to cook, and I have been cooking a lot. I also am finding joy, I've always, but even more now, in turning off cable news and turning on some music. DJ Nice particularly gave me joy a couple of weekends ago. Party over here. What gives me hope? What gives me hope is, I'll tell you guys, what gives me hope is when I look at those healthcare workers going to work every day. The level of sacrifice that they are making in service of others, the commitment they have. You know, it's not like healthcare workers who go in at a time of war. Yes, they are making great sacrifice. They're exposed to extreme trauma. But this is that, along with our healthcare workers going to work every day, knowing their own lives may be at risk by going every day, and they still keep going. And it's everyone from the physicians to the nurses to the folks who are cleaning the hospitals and serving the food, the people who are working in our grocery stores, who are not, to the earlier point, making money that is commensurate with the value that they serve and the dignity of their work. It gives me such great hope, because it's about the character of the people of our country, and contrasted with the lack of character of the guy in the White House. And so many of us have been dispirited for these last 3 years. When we look at that point, because I'm in my apartment in DC, the White House is just about there. When we look at that, we're so dispirited. But look at what we have seen in this moment of crisis in terms of the heroes, the angels who are walking among us. And this gets back to the whole point of also bringing everyone together this evening, Amanda. And let's look at where there's been a vacuum of leadership from the White House: the mayors, the county officials, the governors, the elected leaders who have then taken it upon their shoulders, which we are watching become broader and broader as they take the weight of this to do what they know must be done. If it's not being done by someone else, they are doing it. And that's the power of elected office. And it's the power of an individual to take on the seriousness of the nobility of public service, holding these offices in the public trust that can influence the lives of people you may never meet, people who may never know your name, but will forever be changed because of your decision to take on a life of public service, be it an elected office or not. So thank you for this.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for spending so much time with us tonight. I know you have really busy schedules. I'm going to tell you what gives me hope. It's the fact that we still have people signing up. We still have people who are signing up every day who are telling us they want to run for office. Every single day, dozens of people, hundreds of people over the course of these weeks are saying, I still want to run, and will you please help me? They're not letting this pandemic or this crisis discourage them. In fact, it is making them jump in full feet, ready to go. So that's why I hope everybody who's on tonight, you've already contributed. If you're able to give again, I would be remiss if I didn't ask. Please do post it on social media. It means so much to us, especially right now. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists tonight and every night. I want to say thank you to our host committee, to our staff who put this together. We're going to be sending out all of the videos from this week and the information on all of our panelists and the links that we've shared in the chats and all of that in an email tomorrow. But thank you. This has been such an incredible week, and this conversation was so powerful. So have a really, really good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.